Welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504(c)(2), Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
I'm Lindsey.
We're here to talk about Blue Thunder, starring Roy Scheider, Warren Oates, Candy Clark, Daniel Stern, and Malcolm McDowell. Written by Dan O'Bannon and Don Jacoby, directed by John Badham, released in 1983 on a $22 million budget, grossed over $42 million at the box office, spawned a, quickly run television show, and is kind of a twofer for John Badham in 1983 when it comes to 80s techno-thrillers. He's also the director of WarGames, and so he had both of those in this same year. So let's get a little background on this, though. Linz, is this a first time for you to fly on the Blue Thunder?
It is the first time. I vaguely recall the show that you just mentioned, but
yeah.
This is my very, very first time seeing anything about it.
James Ferrantino was on that show of the Final Countdown fame, and a very, very young Dana Carvey and, in the Lyman Good type role. We'll talk about here a little bit. Blue Thunder is not the first time I've seen this. I've seen this many times. It's been a long time since I watched it, though. One of my earliest movie memories is Jaws, and Roy Scheider just burnt an impression on me. My dad's name is Roy too, so I just kind of gravitated on that. But I always appreciated the performances he gave because he is such an everyman. And what's funny is years later learned that he did this because he absolutely 100,000% refused to have anything else to do with the Jaws franchise after Jaws 2. He hated that so much. And so he told his agent, book anything. I don't care. I have to be able to tell him I can't do 3. And this was what he did instead. And I've seen Jaws 3, and while I find fun in it, I think he made the right choice.
I think so, too. I would agree. Having seen now both this and Jaws 3.
Right. But again, I saw this one when I was growing up. I think I was at a friend's house and we rented it because teenage boys action movie. That's kind of what we thought this was going to be. Yeah. And it may or may not have been somewhat surprised by an early scene that I'm sure we'll talk about, but that we weren't aware was there because I'd seen this on cable, and obviously, they don't exactly show all that on cable. At least they didn't back in those days. Now they might, I don't know. But I remember really thinking like, oh yeah, this movie's cool. It's a helicopter chase, but I didn't really pay attention to what was going on. And then I revisited it years later as an adult, and I was like, oh man, this has got like some stuff happening in it. Much like WarGames is about a lot more than just a kid hacking NORAD to play some computer games. This one's got some words for it. And like 80s techno thrillers and Cold War paranoia are just a favorite subgenre of mine anyway. I love all that kind of stuff.
Cold War paranoia.
Mm-hmm.
That is perfect for this movie. When I was looking it up before we watched it, because we're sitting at our desks, and I said, hey, Brian, does this movie sound like one you'd want to watch? And I got through half of a sentence of the the synopsis, which was let's see, it's a specially modified police helicopter, and I don't even think I finished the word helicopter, and Brian goes, yes. I was like, okay, cool, but neither of us had seen it before. And I saw it was rated R, and I thought, well, this is going to be good because this is 83. They got away with a lot more stuff then. So if it's rated R, there must be some really interesting scenes in here. Not as many as I thought, to be honest. I was expecting more, but I understand why.
I actually dug that up because besides the infamous yoga scene that we'll talk about, that definitely got it in R, the language in it, but they also said the fact that it's police helicopters firing in open areas around civilians that really like the violence, the MPAA just really just couldn't imagine. I mean, think about how quaint the 1980s were. We could not imagine airplanes shooting buildings. And now, like, go watch a superhero movie and it's 57 9/11s every time you turn around,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. But, yeah, no, the fact that this is rated R, it's really only the language and the one nude scene, that really gets it. But it's also the violence that's pretty. I mean, in 1983, this would have shocked people to have something this outlandishly violent and
Yeah.
towards civilians.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even now, I found it
Yeah.
shocking, even with all of our superhero movies, and there are casualties. I mean, we all saw the Batman versus Superman, so we know that we've seen the other side of those. And even with all that, I was like, oh, this is not okay.
Yeah.
I can't even suspend my disbelief, because you're not dealing with superheroes, you're dealing with like real people.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I couldn't separate my brain from like I can with the superhero movies, because we know superheroes aren't real. So, well, you don't think superheroes.
Well, I think the thing about this one too is what's so wild about it is a movie that's made in 1982, really, and then came out in 1983, is about and this is what really drew Roy Scheider to it, because he and Badham read the script, and O'Bannon and Jacoby's original script was even more violent. That like it was almost like Rambo in a helicopter, like First Blood in a helicopter. And not that the Scheider character went off like that, but that it was getting used for that kind of over policing, and which is a theme that, like, you go watch the Arnold Schwarzenegger Running Man, it's in there. Demolition Man is about that, right? This idea that the police turn on the public because the corporate owned government entity tells them that's what you need to do. That was a shocking idea. Like, how could that be? And nowadays, like, that's every other 5 minutes on the news. Like, there's no.
I know. I was like, maybe that's why I found it so shocking, is because it hits a little too close to home right now. And so it may have been a little more far-fetched when it came out, but we hear, I mean, they just had their local news station. Now we've got 24-hour news outlets, and we're being targeted for, breaking news stories every 30 seconds. So
right. I mean, like, our phones, no telling what the algorithm will spool up tonight when we get done recording this after listening to us talk about this, all kinds of QAnon ads on your Instagram feed. But I mean, really, though, there is something about this in this time, and it's interesting to think about, because I was a little kid at this point. So, I'm hazily aware of the world around me at that point. But having lived long enough to retrospect on it, I remember, like, this wasn't the Reagan 80s yet. Like, it was toward the end of first term when that really started to kick in. And like Ron and I've talked about it, you talked about it with me too. People think of the 80s, they really think of like 1984, late 84 to like 1990, or through 90 is what we think of as the 80s. But the early 80s is very, very much still 70s. That 70s grit, the film still looks gritty. The actors are gritty. Again, you get a guy like Roy Scheider. He's not the Schwarzenegger, Stallone, Van Damme, all the 80s action stars. He's in everything.
Like Daniel Craig.
Yeah.
Kind of has like that body type.
Yeah, wiry, kind of thin. Yeah. Well, he was a boxer. Like, that's the funny thing about Roy Scheider, is he was a fighter, and then of course was an actor, and had been in all kinds. I mean, at this point, he'd been in the French Connection and all kinds of things. He had done a lot of course, Jaws, and Jaws 2, which he doesn't like, but is a pretty fun movie. But he's been in a lot of stuff, and this is when his career. It's neat to find a guy in his 40s hit an action crescendo, because he started doing a lot of movies after this and stuff. So much like Craig when he got Bond, had been around for a little bit, but then that was a game changer for him. And I don't know that Roy Scheider ever got anything bigger than Chief Brody, but he was a well-respected actor into his 70s when he, retired and then passed away. But I just remember, again, being gravitated toward this, and then revisiting it again as a young adult, and going, man, this has got a lot more going in it than what I remembered. And I didn't remember how all, like, nastily it was all tied together, and it just reminded me of, like, man, talk about tropes that get reused and reused. I've recently been rewatching The Shield, the old FX show, and like, there's a whole subplot in the first 2 seasons about this deputy chief that is helping tank prices of property where he put that police station so he can sell it for a better price. And I'm like, that's exactly what happens in this movie. Like, it's kind of wild.
Even the music felt like, and I know we'll probably talk a little bit more about this in depth, but it felt like it was one, I guess, musical trope after another. Every single track that came on with whatever the corresponding theme was felt like I have heard this before. And you can almost recognize the movie that it came from, or what very closely came from. I'm not suggesting they plagiarized the music.
No. I mean, this is you're talking about
it was very like on the nose.
It was indicative of the time, right? Like Arthur Rubinstein's the composer here, and he worked on this and War Games. So if you've seen War Games, you've heard this. It's almost the same thing, like in reverse. Like they're really close together. And he worked on some, a lot of other things too. But I think I hear this movie and I see this movie and I see a lot of War Games in it because, again, it's Badham. It's the way he shoots things, and it's also the time period and just that. Again, for being a techno thriller, the music almost sounds techno, right? Like there's a little 80s techno to it. It's got, which, I mean, we should say, like, back in those days, nowadays that's, just your laptop. Like you can do that on your phone probably and make it sound pretty good. But like they were having to do that with synthesizers that you plug in and out of the wall and, all this stuff. I mean, to come up with that in this time was a feat. Yeah.
It was cool.
Yep. It was definitely one of those things. And then, you get all the helicopter stuff and I'm sure we'll get into it, but it's fun to look at this and this idea that we create this super weapon, right? And, I'm sure that won't get misused at all. And the fact that our protagonist is so flawed as a person or whatever, but he's got such principles. And that's what Scheider said really drew him to this, was he felt like this was the kind of technology that a guy like Murphy would see and go, there's no way that can be allowed to exist, and you got to have somebody that just says, no, we're not going to do this, and obviously it's a lesson that fell on, unhearing ears, because look at the world we live in now. But, in the time, you can see why people would get behind what he does in this movie.
Yeah, he has these beautiful, he plays his character so cool. Just cool as a cucumber, except for a few of those flashback moments. But then we see, sometimes in conjunction with those flashbacks, like these really just sweet, he's just happy that everybody's okay type of faces. And he really is waiting, like in the case of the ejected pilot from the fighter jet. And he watches to make sure that after he ejects himself, he lands safely and he smiles a little bit. And then that's contrasted with, seeing, the bad guy.
Malcolm McDowell. Yeah. Cochran.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it just brings a very similar flashback where it didn't end so well. So
yeah,
that was nice. But we see that he's really the good guy.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a stark contrast between them that we'll talk about, even though he is complicated. And I think that's what makes him an interesting one. I think it's time for us to go through a quick plot summary, though, before we get any deeper into it, Lynn. So let me lay this on you real quick. Our unlikely hero is Frank Murphy, a grizzled and grumpy Vietnam vet who's a helicopter pilot for the LAPD. He's paired with a wide-eyed rookie, Lyman Good, played by a very baby-faced Daniel Stern, who wouldn't know a riot from a TikTok dance. They take some time spying on a lady doing some naked yoga because the 1980s. And in the meantime, a city councilwoman is attacked. Suspended, Murphy tries to relate again with his on and off again girlfriend, but his PTSD and his wild card nature keep her at arm's length. Murphy and Lyman Good are then reassigned to a super tricked out helicopter called Blue Thunder that's basically an iPhone with a cannon on it. However, his old Army rival, the amazingly British Colonel Cochran, played by Malcolm McDowell, how he was in the U.S. Army, we'll have to talk about, who once tried to get him court-martialed, is headed up the project and tries to sabotage Murphy on a test flight. Murphy and Lyman Good finally get their chance to test out Blue Thunder's advanced surveillance tech, and they learn that this baby isn't just for catching bank robbers. It's a government tool for keeping tabs on the city. It's Big Brother with rollerblades and urban pacification, as Ben Richards will later learn in the Running Man game show in the future. This leads to some cool high-speed chases through LA traffic, eat your heart out Fast and Furious, and plenty of explosions that would impress even a young Michael Bay. And finally, a showdown where Murphy becomes a one-man Air Force to take down Cochran with a hit the brakes and a fly right by before it was cool maneuver, while his girlfriend runs the surveillance tape to the news. After dispatching his foes, Murphy does the right thing because Roy Scheider, and lands Blue Thunder on some train tracks where it's destroyed by the Elder Central rail line as he walks off into the night, and credits roll. And that's our straight line. It's a pretty simple plot, oddly enough, for these techno-thrillers and stuff tend to be kind of intricate in some ways. Like I sort of think of Tom Clancy movies as the real prototype of my lifetime for what those are, because I think he revolutionized them. But this one's pretty straightforward with what goes on. I mean, you've got the absolute right guy with the wrong job, and when he finds out what it's for, it's not going to last.
Right. I did feel to your "it's pretty straightforward" plot comment, it felt like it might have been a little too long for what it was. There were definitely some cuts that could have been made, or I think I would have been the length. I mean, it's not insanely long; it's less than 2 hours. But if they had cut, I don't know, there were some superfluous things in there, I felt, but leaned more into the techno, because I feel like they just grazed on the tech. It was just enough to let people know that this was super advanced, but we didn't really get that real lean into it, I felt like.
Yeah, it's not as explained as something like, say, Hunt for Red October, where they actually tell you how the submarine works, and you get to see all the pieces, and you have these whole scenes where Jack Ryan's talking to this engineer about all the tech on the submarine and all this stuff. Yeah. Which, if you ever read that book, it's just chapters of that.
I haven't. I'll take your word for it, though. I did like where they show how the helmet kind of
tracks with the gun.
Yeah, tracks with the gun. And it was funny to see when the instructor looked at Murphy and goes, "You want to give it a try?" And the giant grin on Murphy's face, like, yeah.
Exactly. No, I love the intro to Murphy, because they're going out for the evening shift is coming in. They're getting ready to go take off, and he's over in the corner, and he's doing like this little meditation thing with his little watch, right? He's got the little minute countdown, and I didn't know what he was doing for the longest time. I was like, is he checking his pulse? Or I was like, no, we didn't have watches that did that back then, that weren't like huge wristband things like the original Garmin, or whatever. But and I don't know if they had them back then that far back, but he's doing a meditation test because, as we'll learn, he suffers from very real PTSD from being a chopper pilot in Vietnam. And the idea of this little thing, and it's something that apparently was in the script and Scheider really liked, was that at any one situation, all you can do is control 1 minute at a time. So if you can just calm yourself and just be in 1 minute, like that's what that countdown is for 60 seconds. So do anything else but just be in that minute, then you can get through the next obstacle. It helps you sort of focus and stuff. And I thought, what a neat little thing or whatever. And I love how Lyman Good, Daniel Stern, comes up to him and he's like, "You mind if I ask what you're doing?" And he just opens up one eye and says, "No, I don't mind you asking." And he never tells him. Yeah. And I love that kind of thing, though, because again, a lesser movie would bother to explain that, but it just leaves it for us, and we get to meet these guys as they're doing their job, as it were. They're rolling around the city at night and helping the cops on the ground bust the bad guys.
Yep. And we get to see some really cool car chases and helicopter chases in the meantime. Those were some really cool things. I don't know if you had a chance to look into this or not, Jay, but how practical were those effects? Do you know? Like, were there actually helicopters and helicopter pilots just hovering and doing all of this stuff?
Those are all real helicopters, real helicopter pilots. Now, there's a couple of times when it's models, obviously, like the loop that he'll do, and the jet stuff is all model work and things like that. But all the policing stuff where you see them flying around and doing things, those are real helicopters. Yeah. And not Roy Scheider's not flying one, obviously, but all the aerial stuff was done by real chopper pilots. And they took a real chopper and because they felt like it was the fastest, sleekest thing, and then they bolted all that stuff on it to make it look, futuristic, kind of make it look like what we know as a modern Apache or whatever. And all they did was slow it down because it was so heavy. So they had to come up with ways to make it look faster than it really was. They said the thing barely would move. Like it was just so slow because it had so much crap on it that it's not built to hold.
That's great. Murphy, even there are a few lines he has that talks about how heavy the helicopter feels. Like they're just joking around about it. There's a
YouTube channel. I'll link it in the description. It's this guy who's a former pilot. He flew airplanes. He flew helicopters in the military, and his name is C.W. Lemoyne. And he does a lot of stuff with flying and everything. But he'll every now and then he'll take a movie about flying, and he'll kind of break it down from the point of view of like a real pilot. Like, okay, that was real, or oh, that's not exactly how that works. And I watched his like little 10-minute on this when he just cut up all the flying scenes, and he said, honestly, the people, whoever they had as technical advisor, gave them all the right jargon. The stuff they're saying, that makes sense. He said, probably wouldn't work exactly like that. That's not what that button does. He said, but it looks good on a movie. And he said, yeah, that's about how that would operate. He said, the fact that he's talking about how sluggish it is, it probably was, if you try to fly something like that. He said, the real pilot probably told him, this thing's going to fall over. He said, because you have that much weight on the front end of it, it makes the rest of it have to work harder. But even just the regular police helicopter stuff, I didn't realize like how blinding one of those police lights could be and how oppressive that thing is. When the guys are robbing the liquor store early and they're, flashing them down and stuff like that, like it literally can knock you to the ground. The light is so harsh on you because there's heat coming off of it and all that. And I did a little digging, and they said that was one of the things that somehow Dan O'Bannon had met a few police helicopter pilots, and they talked to him, and he said, is it really just to show where everything is? He said, well, it helps the ground officers know where everything is, one. He said, but a big light like that shining down on somebody freaks them out. You're not used to it. And he said, it'll blind you and disorient you, and that's long enough for the cops to come in and get you.
I was going to say, it could definitely blind you. Did you watch a lot of Cops as a kid growing up?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That was on in the background usually while we were doing something else.
Why are you all sweaty?
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool. Yeah, there were a couple scenes where you could kind of tell that it was a model, but for the most part, it looked really good. And I just couldn't stop thinking about, like, I wonder how much of this would be CGI if this movie was made now. Like, I guess it depends on the director, but I don't know if they would use as much actual, like, stunting and real. I don't know. If it was a Tom Cruise movie, they probably would.
Yeah, they would. Yeah, Cruise would insist that they actually flew stuff, even though, everybody talks about that Top Gun movie for all of it, the new one with all of its practicals and stuff. And there are a lot in it, but there's a lot of CGI in that too. It's just really well done. And that's fine. I happen to think, again, depending on who the director is nowadays, what you would get, but the fact that this is mostly practical, and even when it's not, the model work is really well done. The jets don't look great, and we'll talk about like a helicopter versus jets in a minute, and like how not realistic that was. But the way it looks, particularly for its time, it looked great, and even now, like, it doesn't look bad.
No,
practical effects work when they're cut right.
Yeah, it didn't look bad at all. And honestly, if I'd been watching on like my computer screen, I probably would not have really noticed the difference between the models and the practical effects. But I, was eating dinner while I was watching it, so it was on the bigger screen.
Yeah. And I watched it on my really big one too, and I thought, okay, how's this going to work blown up to 65-inch or whatever?
Right.
And it worked pretty good. Looked really nice.
I wasn't sure at first, because when it first started, it was pretty grainy, and I was like, I might have to move this to a different room if this is what the whole thing's going to be like. If it hasn't been remastered. Sometimes you don't know what you're going to get when you're streaming. Or if you open a DVD case, you haven't for a while. Like,
yeah.
You just never can tell. But no, it looked great, I thought, after that opening. So.
Yeah, no, and I love too that we get the interplay between the guys too, because I think it's important that we set up, Lyman Good, it's the Jaffo, and all of that stuff, which I love that they're just another effing observer, they get to play it off like that. But you have to have like the younger guy, or the rookie, if you will, with the old grizzled veteran. That's a buddy cop trope, even though they don't really buddy around that much in this movie. But you also realize too that like he could have been wearing a hat that said dead meat. Like, like, well, he's clearly going to die at some point. Like you have to sacrifice somebody.
Yeah, but Murphy was so good with him as the
Yes.
young kid. Like he was such a good, seemed like he was such a good trainer, teacher,
Hmm.
mentor. If Lyman Good, which by the way, I did not see the the car death coming. I did not see his murder coming. I really didn't. I should have. I was like, I shouldn't be surprised by this, but you hope. You hope
Yeah.
that this sweet little kid is going to stay alive.
I think I just
But
knew it, like I
yeah,
just from knowing the movie too. But even then, I just was like, yeah, that guy just looks like somebody that's going to have to bite it.
yeah, dead meat
Yeah.
for sure. But if he had lived a little bit longer, I bet he and Murphy would have worked really well together.
And it's kind of what they do on the TV
Fun.
show. The Dana Carvey character is really kind of the comic relief part of it, but they have a good back and forth with the kind of the grizzled veteran and stuff. But these guys get in trouble early on because they're screwing around when they're not supposed to. Like they're over hovering in the neighborhood, and
Yeah,
the
the naked yoga lady.
the naked yoga lady is well, I mean, again, putting it out of teenage boy land when I saw it at first. You watch it now and you're like, that's really scary. That's how close you could be and she wouldn't hear it.
Yep.
And I'm like, wow. I mean, I like to think my ears are pretty good. And when like it's like game day here in town, like I can hear the helicopter, the traffic copter going over. Like it's not like it's quiet. And they weren't in Blue Thunder doing that. So they're just hanging out.
Yeah, and we live actually pretty close to an air base, and so we get all kinds of helicopters and cool planes and stuff flying over us all the time.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how big or small they are. We hear them like if I'm on a meeting and they fly over, I have to mute or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's that. Everybody hears them and then they think something's wrong.
So they're
Like,
coming to
no, no,
get you.
it's fine.
But I love that they're playing that off, and I mean I know it's just a trope of the times, like I said, because
Yeah.
the '80s were doing that, but they're actually like they've seen this weird car over in this neighborhood it shouldn't be in, like Brentwood or whatever, and they're like, we're gonna blow that off and go and do this, and it turns out that those people were there to, as we'll learn, to do a hit on this city councilwoman,
Hmm.
and that's what it's the inciting incident of the movie that I really like because it gets us into this. You understand that there's a deeper conspiracy to all these things, right?
Yeah.
And that to me was very much reminiscent of something like the Dirty Harry movies from the 70s. That felt like it was in a different movie than this movie was.
Yeah. It did. I think without that conspiracy, I mean, that's the whole reason for the movie, but
Mm-hmm.
they would tie in clues to that conspiracy at just the right time. And it was almost always when I was like, man, this movie feels real long. Then we'd get another little clue or another little nugget about what the real big picture is here.
Yeah.
So,
And what we'll find out is she was very outspoken against policing policies and this whole idea of having this helicopter offensive response team. They call it Thor, all this stuff. And she was going to vote against it and really pushing it. And they decided, well, we could either scare her to death or just take her out. And, nowadays that sounds like, well, of course, because that's what we do. But in the 1980s, there was this established trope that like every corporation had goons. And I mean, like and now, like, I would believe it, but back then I was like, really? Like the company would have like hitmen? But I think there was this cinematic reason to do that was that we had lost the mafia at that point. They had been broken, at least in a lot of ways.
yeah.
So where are those guys henchmen going to go to work? Going to go to work for Apple or Microsoft or, whatever.
And honestly, the health insurance was probably a lot better.
Truth, right? I mean, back then, man, health insurance actually covered something. So now you have to have insurance to cover what your insurance doesn't cover. Talk about the world we live in, but yeah,
It's fun.
yeah, no, but I mean, I like this whole conceit and the fact that Murphy like doesn't buy it. Like he's like, that's not
Yeah.
just a mugging. That was, like he goes, like you can tell he's done other things besides just be a helicopter pilot. So he goes, he does a little investigating, and I love his relationship with his on and off girlfriend, who has
Yeah.
the kid and stuff, and I just liked her whole spunk, man. She just seemed like a fun person.
Do you know? So the first the first scene that they had together, I was left just asking, like, what did I just watch? What is this? Did they date? Were they dating? Are they broken up? And then they have enough scenes where it's like, oh, this is just how they interact with each other. It is like an on again, off again relationship, which is, it worked so well for me. One of my huge pet peeves, especially in like a sci-fi movie, for example, like, is when there's a love story that has no business being in the movie.
Right.
It drives me absolutely crazy. And this one worked. It wasn't overly done. She was there to help, like, get what he needed to get. And, it was just a fun, light thing, but with a purpose. And man, I just don't see that a whole lot. So I really appreciated it.
This one has things going on in it that bucked the trend of all the time in cinema. There's no gratuitous sex, between them. There's a very adult relationship where you can tell, like, at the very least, they're good friends. He trusts her. She trusts him with the kid. That he has a relationship with the kid, even though it's not his. And we got to think too, in the early 1980s, a single mother, that's a hard thing. Like, her life is not easy anyway. And especially trying to, have a life and a career and a job. And then she's trying to keep this relationship up with this guy. It would be hard to date, all that stuff. And so you sort of see these two people that have had ups and downs in life is what I'm trying to get at. And they're good for each other, even though they can't quite totally commit to it. And we don't need to see the arc of them doing that. We just need to know that there's trust there. She can't fix her clocks and toaster. He can't keep his shit together, and they're kind of good for each other. That's how it works. He crashes on the couch sometimes and makes her stuff work, but I like that. I like that about him because it gives a good insight, because it's character motivation by very quick exposition, which is a hard thing to do in a movie that isn't about that. It's about all these other things, but we have to have these sort of grounding principles for him too.
Yeah, it worked. It really worked for me.
When they intro Blue Thunder and we get the whole data dump of all of that is one of my favorite scenes, because and the guy that, again, the YouTube guy I'm talking about, like, talks about, like, yeah, those ratios aren't exactly what you want. That's a complete test fail. Like, 1 civilian for every dead 10 terrorists. I'm like, that's not a good odd. Like, we're not going to go with that. No. But the fact that they go through all of that stuff and they show everything it can do, it's a way to show the tech off, but also show immediately that Murphy doesn't trust it from the get-go.
Yeah, and that ratio of 1 to 10 or 10 to 1 gets smaller and smaller with each pass. And it's like, now I'm pretty sure it's 10 and 10. Like,
yeah. When he shoots the bus up, I'm like, that's not how you attack the bus. Like, maybe blow the tires out. Sure. But if you fire down into the bus, it's like, we're just going to let the children go. Like, we're just blow them all away. I love that Roddy McDowall in this movie, and he talks about it, he was afraid to even fly. So when they put him up in helicopters, he was painfully sick and scared out of his mind. Like, he does not fly. He doesn't like flying. He didn't know what it was when he signed on to it. And he realized he was actually going to have to go up in one. He thought, I'll just sit in a little, booth or whatever. And he said, nope, they made me fly in one. And every time I got out, if I looked ghostly pale, it's because I thought I was going to die.
So funny.
But look at his performance. He's so, like, cocky and confident and menacing to be such a little guy. And he's always been that, I think, his whole career, but it's such a wild thing to know that bit and then to watch him on the screen.
I know. Now I'm processing that new piece of information. And there's one scene when he's running, it's toward the end of the movie, when he's running out to his helicopter to kind of meet Murphy in the air. And I just thought, man, he even runs like a douchebag. But now maybe he was just running because he didn't like that, because he didn't want to get into that helicopter.
But no, you're right though. Everything he does, he is such a douchebag. And I love how they, Like, they don't bother to explain the backstory. He tried to get Murphy court-martialed. We don't really know why. We also don't know how they're in the same military, because I don't know a lot about Vietnam, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't a joint strike force. So the Brits would not be loaning this guys at that point. So, and they don't ever bother to do it. And it was Roy Scheider's idea to take the piss out of him by making fun of his accent the whole time. And then I was like, I just love that. I was like, he just kept doing it.
Every time Roy Scheider did that, it was so perfect.
Yes.
It was so funny. It hit just like it was supposed to, I think. Mm-hmm. But Malcolm McDowell made it work too, because you could tell it just irritated the hell right out of him every single time.
Yeah. I love his little catch you later thing. He keeps doing that. It's just such a, you're clearly trying to make something
the
work.
movie was going to end on that too.
Oh yeah. Well, and when Roy gets him, and it's the perfect like New York thing too, because he's a big New York guy. He's like, catch you later. It's like, oh yeah, that's Chief Brody telling you to go to hell. Smile, you son of a bitch. And then he shoots him. But no, I liked I like their banter back and forth, and I love how Roddy McDowell is like supreme goon for these corporate guys, right? And all these these government officials and stuff, who it's not really said, but you can tell like they've all got like real estate investment involved in this, like they know. And it should be said, this is on the the time of the 1983 Olympics are going to be in LA. We got a boycott with the Russians, so there's all these terrorism threats and all this stuff. So the idea of having this souped up police helicopter would be very prescient for the time. Like people would think about it nowadays. Like we just sort of almost accept that those things exist, but arming one of these things out with that would have been scary. But the thing about Blue Thunder to me, Lindsey, that it's not the gun on it that makes it so scary, and that is a pretty badass gun. It's all the freaking like the high-tech recording equipment that it can do. I mean, it's an eavesdrop machine.
It is not just recording. I mean, not just sound either. They've got video recording. We saw the zoom on that in the, I don't know, what would you call it? Prostitute scene?
Yeah.
When she's leaning up against the car, and we've got sweet little Lyman Good all excited about seeing some cleavage.
Poor boys.
But that's NSA level shit right there.
Yeah.
In one helicopter.
Yeah, I mean, when they're outside the window in the whisper mode, which is a real thing a helicopter can do, it can go into a quiet mode to do observation, and they're picking up on all that. I mean, it is like the James Bond villain scene where they're just laying out the whole plot for you, but it also feels like the right kind of thing to have in this movie. You need to have a room where everybody's getting together to talk about the evil plan, and then now the guy knows it, and so now we're really screwed. And Cochran's like, I told y'all, you should have let me kill him when I had the chance. And I do like that he is very much Scott Evil. Like, well, I'll get a gun and we'll shoot him together. Like he wanted to kill him the minute he saw it. Like, hey, I've hated this guy for 10 years. I want to kill him now. Can I kill him, please? And I love that he is always on antagonist mode. But it's when they drop all that info, and it's a big data dump, if you don't catch all of it, and they realize, and they set up a great MacGuffin with, as long as the tape's in the case and you hit that mag button, it'll erase it. And I used to do mag tape backups at a job I had, and they lived in things like that. So if you hit the little switch on it, it would erase it pretty quick, but if it wasn't in it, it wouldn't work. So I used to think that was bullshit, and then I had that job, and I was like, oh wow, that actually really exists. But they said like they put that in there purposely because they thought nobody will believe it. They think it's space age, but it's actually a real thing. And the TV station is the one that taught them about it. Is what the screenwriter said.
I had no idea. I was just like, I mean, it all right. Watching this in 2024, all looks like sci-fi tech to me because it's so different. Also, I'm not like a helicopter mechanic or anything. I've never even been not up in a helicopter. I've seen one, but it all felt unrealistic to me, but like it could be.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it doesn't work exactly like it's shown, but it's close enough that you're like, okay, yeah, I can buy that, right? It also puts like a ticking clock on all this stuff, because obviously they got to move quickly with this, and that's when Lyman Good is the one that runs away with the tape, and then man, they beat the absolute hell out of him before they'd run him over with the car. Like I felt bad for that dude.
I did too. Sweet, and he was just so sweet. And honestly, like, let's just talk about how Daniel Stern just gets beat up a lot in movies.
Yes, I know. Yeah, he gets beat up here. He gets beat the hell up by Macaulay Culkin twice. So,
yeah. So,
gets beat up in City Slickers. He just gets beat up.
Yeah, maybe I don't know. He was like, "Look, I know how I'm typecast. This is how I'm going to make my money."
Hey, I give credit to somebody who can be a comedian, but then when he has to, can turn on the drama. Because like when he's running from him at the end and before they run him down, like the look on his face is this combination of like fear and also knowing like, yeah, this is how this is going to go. Like he has no chance.
Yeah, I just kept thinking that someone would save him last minute, superhero trope, and it didn't happen. They just bowled him right over.
Well, I mean, that's when Murphy realizes that we need to talk about their captain of the helicopter squad, Warren Oates, in one of his last roles. Great actor from the 60s and 70s. He died not long after this was made, and it's what a lot of the tropes of the angry police captain are based on, but he doesn't actually do any of those things, like the freaking out, yelling at you stuff. I love he says, Murphy, if you don't see me able to sit down, it's because the mayor just chewed off what's left of my ass, and all that stuff. And I love that though, that he's tough on them, but he also gets where they're coming from. Like he's a little both, right? But it's still he's got to do a job, and he's caught in the red tape, and he can't do anything about it, and he knows he can't do anything about it. So when Murphy steals Blue Thunder, and their answer is like, well, we're just going to go and shoot him down, he's like, this is a bad idea, because he knows what Murphy's capable of.
Yeah, but he likes Murphy very clearly. He doesn't listen to anyone when they're like, you need to take care of this guy, let him go, do whatever. But he has some really funny snapbacks. What was the one? They were like, Murphy, someone said Murphy measures his, I can't remember if it was sanity or something with his watch, with a timer. And he goes, what do you measure yours with, a dipstick? I was like, that was great. What a great comeback.
No, he felt like something again from another time and another movie. Like he very much felt like he was from a Dirty Harry movie in some ways, some of Harry Callahan's superiors through the years. And again, you've got Murphy on the run there, and we have to talk about the way that they deploy all the stuff after him. Like he takes out the police helicopter pretty easily because he knows what to do, and he knows how to shoot him down without killing them. And this is after he's almost crashed in one, which that was a really like the way that went down, that crash and stuff. Again, that pilot guy was like, yeah, that's about how that would go. He said, it's about, if you could lay it down and walk out of that, you're feeling pretty good, but he shoots those down. It's when the two F-16s come around that I'm like, now we're stretching a little bit. And even Roy Scheider said, I didn't like the fact that he was in a public area. He said, I felt like Murphy would have flown out to the middle of nowhere or to somewhere abandoned to take on those pilots. Because the fact that they just shoot missiles into like, the barbecue restaurant and a couple of high rises, and everybody's just like, whatever. He's like, that's not what this guy would do. But the studio won on that one.
I feel like at least with the barbecue restaurant, it gave the air that everybody got out safely.
Yeah.
Plus, we had that punctuated by the raining chicken, which was just funny.
Yes, it was. Well, and the pilot going like, oh, shit. Like he knows. Like, well, just screwed that up.
Yeah. But then they did it again. And I think that was the sun glare shot, right? I was like, people definitely died in that one, unless it's like a Sunday and nobody's working. But I'm pretty sure that no one walked away. Like, not everyone walked away from that.
Yeah, it's wild to look at now. Again, in a post 9/11 world, we think about that kind of violence in a urban area, and it just, you look at it differently. But even then, it just would have been shocking and stuff. The fact he's able to shoot one down is kind of wild. It's like that would not work. Like, the only way the helicopter could ever get the drop on a plane is if the plane didn't know it was there. Like, and they obviously knew where he was. So, but you take it for what it is, because it's got to be him versus Cochran at the end, with Cochran's big gunship. And and I like too how they play with the tech on the Blue Thunder. You know, the gun will rotate wherever his head goes. Well, they blow that up pretty quick, so now it can only shoot straight on. You know, so he's got to learn how to outmaneuver it, and it's all about the fact that Murphy can outfly this guy, which is probably why the guy hates him. You know, truthfully, is one of the reasons. And they had set up this idea of doing a 360 loop in a helicopter. And that, you know, it's bullshit. You can't do it. And apparently you can do it. You have to get a lot of thrust to make it work. And that wasn't real. That was a model, obviously. But when he pulls it upside down and tries to do that, and he starts talking about like it's a big tub of shit, the pilot guy was like, no, that's exactly what you would say, because it would feel like all the weight in the world laying on top of you trying to do that at that point. But I liked that move, though, because, again, it reminded me of that thing in Top Gun where, you know, Maverick always got him close and then let him go by. It's almost like Firebirds too, right? I was like, oh, I had flashbacks to, I'm going to kill him now, you know, just without any of the, I am the greatest lines. If only a young Nick Cage could have graced the screen.
I locked that away in a closet in my brain, Jay, and
just
made me unlock it.
That it should be unlocked.
That one does not live rent free in my brain.
Imagine Nick Cage's Lyman Good. Could kind of work. Like a 1983 Valley Girl, Nick Cage.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe
wouldn't be as sweet, but it'll work. But I like the showdown. I like the way Murphy takes him out. And again, like I said, that whole this time no accent. It's very New York. You know, catch you later. It's just like he's blown him into hell. And I love that. But I love that the end of it is that obviously Blue Thunder is bent to hell. And if you did something like that in a helicopter, it would wreck the helicopter. Like you wouldn't be able to fly it much longer. It would bend the frame beyond belief. So the fact that he decides, I'm going to set this in front of a train, and I have a brother-in-law who's a train engineer. And so I asked him, I was like, I know you've never seen this. He said, but what would that be like? He said, dude, the train would blow through that like it's not there. He said, helicopters are made out of very light material. He said, I promise you, it wouldn't even be there. So,
but that one had like an inch of armor on it.
Yeah, even so, apparently he said, even moving at any kind of a speed, that train is nothing but steel. He said it's meant to go through whatever's in front of it. So, but I like that he made that choice, though, right? Like that because it's the only way that can end. Like this, again, I go back to what Roy Scheider said about this, is that he felt like the thing that drew him to this story was the chance to play somebody who saw something that, while it was very, you know, marvelous, was also something so evil that couldn't be allowed to exist, and that he would have to take it upon himself to destroy it, even if it wrecked his whole life. So be it.
Yeah, he even had that conversation about like the people are not gonna like this. They're not gonna like that. And even mentioned, like, isn't this illegal? I don't think police helicopters are supposed to be armored and armed.
Or armed like that. Yeah. No. I mean, it's one thing to have a sniper in a SWAT helicopter, you know, because that's a specific person with a specific purpose. But the helicopter being the gun, being a gunship, is no. Like,
right. Yeah. A sniper in a helicopter is different from the helicopter being the sniper.
Yes, exactly. But we didn't talk about Kate gets the tape to the news, and I'm like, talk about flashing back to a different time in America when the local news producer was so trustworthy that he would keep the corporate hitman from getting you in the lobby.
Yep, man. And that is actually something that I feel like could have been cut down a little bit, was how long she had to dig in the garbage.
Yeah.
The video. I was like, we could have cut out about a minute there, 30 seconds. I didn't time it, but it was kind of, I don't know. There were always little pockets of, I don't know, comic relief throughout the movie, like just enough. And I think that was one of them, when he was kind of messing with her while he was in the helicopter and she was trying to search for the video. Not too much. He didn't want to throw her off, but
I mean, it gives you insight again into their relationship.
Yeah.
They can just
Yeah.
kind of pick at each other and have a little fun. Even in the tensest moment, you got to cut it with a little bit of laughter.
Yeah.
Little
And she
levity.
delivered. Man,
Hmm.
she drove her little heart out. And
Yes, yeah,
I love the absolute distrust of whoever the guy was that said he was the producer.
yeah, yeah.
And
I
he's
love
like,
that guy. Yeah,
no, I better not. I can only give it to these people. All
yeah.
right.
And I love that the real producer comes down and like I've never seen that man before. Security, they call him down, and then again, you're right. This is before the 24-hour news cycle, so
Yeah.
we this would have been major breaking news coming in the evening, and the fact that it gets played off in an overlay as Murphy's walking away, behind the wreckage of the helicopter is pretty good because the way it's cut at first, you think Murphy's in the helicopter when he gets hit. And I
Yeah.
had never noticed that before. And I thought, did he like go down with the ship a little bit? But then you see him walk away pretty quick. Like, we can't let that happen.
Well, then my question was, are we supposed to think, or I guess, is everyone in this film, everyone in his life, are they supposed to think that he went down with the ship and now he's just walking away and no one will ever bother him again?
I kind of
Or,
think so. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I feel like he's going to go clean out whatever belongings and valuable he has in the world. And he's getting in that Trans Am and taking off. He's heading in the desert, and, he'll be in Reno in a day, and just out of there. Because again, this is pre-internet, this is pre-DNA, really good fingerprint computers too. He gets a couple states away, it's over,
yeah,
and he can just go and do whatever. So, and you see that he's resourceful enough of a guy that you feel like he's going to come out of it okay. It's not going to be a problem. Does the political message of this work in context and work in today for you though?
yeah. I mean, like I said earlier, kind of it hits a little close to home. Like a lot of this stuff is way, way, way too real, and all of these declassified documents come out with all of the different, I don't know, government conspiracies, and it's all perfectly legal for us to know about, and there's plenty of documentaries about them, and now we know that UFOs and aliens exist, and
Right. Yeah. They just dropped that, by the way, out of nowhere.
yeah, just like, oh, by the way, guys.
Been real forever. So.
Yeah. Fun fact. So yeah, I mean, and I think that everything that we saw in this movie is still very pertinent. Like,
Mhm.
we still don't want giant armored helicopters doing crowd control. That's, I mean, and it's a very real thing that could happen.
Mhm.
And, I think it's the movie is aged, I think, better than they wanted it to.
Yeah. Sadly, I think you're right because, like I say, the message of it fell on ears that didn't want to hear it, and we just, slowly but surely it went away. And you know, we we live in a surveillance life now. I mean, our whole lives are marketed to and solicited. I've talked about for years. Philip K. Dick was way ahead on that. That one day you'd walk into a store and they would go, "Hi, Lindsay, your favorite thing is on sale today," and like that happens when you walk around and on your phone you get random ads from Belk or whatever.
Yeah.
And it does me too. So it's but we just sort of take it for granted. It's like, oh, but see, it's kind of harmless. But if they can do that, what else can they what else are they listed to? And that's the eternal question. We have to trust or just don't ask, because you drive yourself mad knowing it.
Yeah. Just, I think I don't know if I'm just not a very trusting person. That's probably it. But I just always assumed that anything digital, emails, texts, phone calls, could be listened to at any point in time or read at
Yeah.
any point in time. It exists. It's available to anyone who has the um, knowledge or money or wherewithal to obtain it. And then when Snowden dropped that bit of uh, WikiLeaks on us, I was like, I just assumed everybody already knew that. Did we not think that was already happening? I truly did not think that was newsworthy.
I mean, I'm with you. I had assumed that for years anyway.
Yeah.
Because again, I think, I don't know, part of it is having been trained as a journalist and having covered a little bit of city councils and stuff and a little bit of government at one point early in my life. I just became really, I guess, not so much untrusting, but once you see behind the curtain and you see Oz, you're like, yeah, I mean, again, I go back to wrestling. It's all work. So I just assume everybody's just being played to, you know?
Yeah. And I take solace in the fact that I don't really do anything interesting enough for anybody to care about.
That's what I'm saying. Like, if you're assigned to me, I am sorry. My content, this guy watches bad movies and talks to people about them, and it's all this guy. He runs. It's all this guy does. So, he's the most boring person in the world.
Yeah, and I mean, most people's stuff is public now anyway. Though I did find this really funny. I Googled myself recently. I don't know why. I just did, and I was like, let's just see what's out there in the ether these days. And there's some background check site that has literally everything wrong. And it was honestly hilarious. Apparently, I'm married to my former stepmother.
That's awesome.
It was the most bizarre thing. I was like, well, clearly this is not a very reputable site, so I don't think many people are using it.
No. Yeah, all those ID checker sites and stuff, you're just getting robbed, y'all. Like,
yeah, it was funny. Luckily, I didn't pay money to see any of that stuff, but yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff is public. Whatever we put on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever, people can see it. If it's there, then you know, just maybe don't go back and look at my Facebook posts from 15 years ago.
Yeah, Lindsey is hungry today. You remember when it was always like a sentence
I was like, I'm just not that person anymore. When was I ever that person?
I do get a laugh, like the memories post up sometimes, and I look and I'm like, what was I doing? And then it's like, oh yeah, that would be something I would have talked about 12 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
But
why was I so angry that day?
I mean, well, I think too with age, you just learn that if I'm going to spend the energy to be angry, it's going to have to really be worth it. Because I'm just going to go to the don't give a F switch pretty fast. Like, whatever. You know, it's the way it is. So when we talked about, like, you know, some of the trims that could have been made, I gave my one recast for it. I don't know if you have any that you would redo for the movie.
You know, I don't know who I would cast him as. I just feel in my heart that there is a serious lack of Tom Selleck in this movie.
Wow. Yeah. That could be, you know what? He could have been one of the corporate goons or something.
Yeah.
Could have gone for that. Yeah.
I expected to see him at some point. I don't know, maybe because I watch Blue Bloods from time to time, but I just expected to see his perfect little mustache, and I didn't get it. So
this is like Magnum PI time, I think. Like I think he was doing that at this point. So yeah, he would have been, because he would have missed out on Raiders in '81 for this. So yeah, for that. So yeah,
I just really feel like he should have been thrown in there somewhere.
Would have been interesting. Like, you can imagine him as Murphy, but it would give Murphy a totally different character. Like, he would be a very different. Like, if Roy Scheider's again, a real fit guy, but he's not a dashing man, and whereas Tom Selleck's very dashing.
He is dashing. Yeah. He has nice facial hair, nice teeth, nice head hair. Like,
he really does. Yeah. The whole like structures. Yeah. He looks like a big football player or baseball player or something. He
does. Yeah. He wouldn't have worked as Murphy. He definitely would not have worked as Murphy. That's why I just don't know. I don't know where he would have fit in, but I would have liked to see maybe just a cameo of him somewhere.
Would have been neat.
Yeah.
Would have been interesting. So we talked a little bit about the music. There's not really music of note. It's just the soundtrack stuff. And if you've seen WarGames, you've heard this music. So but it is kind of neat for its time.
Yeah, there was one scene I did want to point out, which was when he was, I think it was either sunset, sunrise. Murphy was in the helicopter after it might have been after the big showdown. Now I can't remember, but it was very Star Wars-esque to me. And it looked like Tatooine with the sun coming up over like the California. They were in California for most of this, right?
Yeah, we're in LA. Yeah.
Yeah. So over all this sand and mountains and stuff. And I was like, I feel like they just jacked this from Star Wars, but
would have been fresh on the brain,
Yeah.
I mean, Star Wars would Return of the Jedi would have been earlier that year. So
yeah, it was a beautiful scene, but that music or the score was just like, I feel like I've heard this before. And as you mentioned, probably had. So
indeed, yeah, it's something that you would feel. It feels like it's a part of the movie for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, I think we're at the part of the podcast where it's time to give final thoughts and popcorn ratings. So what are yours for Blue Thunder, Lindsey?
I liked it. It wasn't as gory or nude heavy as I expected based on the rating when I first saw it. After discussing it, totally understand why it still got that R rating. Absolutely for that. But it was a little long. It was a little slow. But overall, I really liked it more than I thought it would. And it aged pretty well. This is just my quick little recap. And I really liked all of the performances. They were fun. The tech was fun. Like I said, wish they leaned into it a little bit more. I think that would have worked well and maybe cut out some other spaces. But overall, I thought it was a fun movie. I think I'd give it a solid medium popcorn. I would recommend watching it. If you haven't seen it yet, I'll probably watch it again. This is not going to be one of those movies that get locked up into the memory banks. So I'll give it a good medium popcorn with butter and salt, and it's like the just right size for satisfaction.
I'll say that this movie, in modern sensibilities, is going to hit some people differently than maybe it did us, and depending on what your life experience is and view of police and things like that. But I think the message of it is still prescient, because Roy Scheider didn't just want to make some dumb action movie. He felt like this movie had something to say, and that this character Murphy was the majority of people that would go like, no, this is a bridge too far. We can't have this. And what's amazing is that we have all of it now and twice. The only thing we don't have are these super armed helicopters, on the force yet. And I say that as a qualified cynical yet, but I mean, really, you don't see it as a far stretch. And it's a little slow at times for sure. I chalk that up to the time period and the fact that it was made by people that were artists coming out of the 70s and still making that kind of sensibility of things, but it still works. It's fun. The performances are fun. Could be trimmed a little bit here and there, but if there's a part that you feel like it's dragging, get up and get a cup of coffee or wash dishes or whatever, and then when it kicks back in, you'll know it. The movie lets you know, and that's what makes it fun. So I'm with you. It's a good medium popcorn, and if you haven't seen it, I do recommend you give it a shot. And if it's not for you, that's cool. That's fine. But I do think it's one that you give it a little bit of thought. And again, I would pair it with something like WarGames, John Badham's other 80s movie, and you can have like a real sort of interesting, heady discussion about the where the world was in Cold War paranoia time and what that was like, because it's a very different world than what we live in today, but the cinema of the time really captured it, and this is one of those that really did. So yeah, medium popcorn for me too. Cool. Well, Linz, as always, been a lot of fun talking about these movies with you folks. You can find this show on all the platforms that host podcasts, whether that's Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, you name it, we are there. Follow the show on social media at FilmstripPod, and you'll find out announcements about upcoming shows, and check out our extensive library wherever you find your podcast. Almost 400 episodes deep, 14 years we've been doing this show. Can't believe that, but always a good time. Please subscribe. Tell others about the show as well. We appreciate the support. So for Lindsey, I'm Jay. Thank you for listening to Filmstrip.
Thank you for listening to Filmstrip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Filmstrip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.